We're going to see how many MVPs Luka Doncic can win, with his overall decreasing by 5 after every single MVP. I've handpicked his teammates to try and give him a better chance against a league with a ton of talent. Also, every year I will be allowed to force a trade to get a new player onto the roster to help out Luka Doncic. The first year is always smooth sailing. I'm sure you see Luka win MVP pretty much every year in 2K Sims, and with this great team, we ended up winning 75 games. Luka was also all defensive first team, but that MVP meant he was dropping down to a 91 overall for the playoffs. We also dropped his potential down to 91 in hopes that his overall wouldn't go back up. We end up getting out of the first round easily, and this overall drop seems to be not affecting Luka at all. And we end up getting out of the second round against New Orleans in 6 games, and we end up beating the Golden State Warriors to advance to the finals. Luka continues his run of domination, winning the NBA Finals at a 91 overall. But player progression was shocking. Somehow he jumped back up to a 95 overall, despite me dropping his attributes. But we still get to make a trade, so I added Jaren Jackson Jr. to try and help Luka get another MVP, but since he was still a 95 overall, this was a pretty easy one for Luka to get. And also, if you do go on to enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate if you consider subscribing. I also want to take a moment to thank you guys for 1,000 subscribers. Anyways, Luka ends up getting his second MVP, and he's back down to a 91, hopefully for good this time, as we end up advancing to the NBA Finals once again to rematch the Philadelphia 76ers, and we beat them again. Now Luka is down to an 88 overall. The overall drop is finally working, and now we're gonna have a real challenge on our hands getting 88 overall Luka MVP, but I did go ahead and add Scotty Barnes to our roster and up Luka's minutes so that he could put up better stats. But early on in the season, his numbers were way down, and I was getting concerned. He was even off the All-Star bench, and he was barely in the MVP conversation. He ended up losing this one to LaMelo Ball, so I knew I needed to change my approach because these numbers were not gonna cut it if we wanted to get Luka yet another MVP. In the NBA Finals, though, we still ended up beating the Cavaliers, so Luka's building up an impressive resume. Anyways, I went ahead and added Desmond Bane. He can be a good shooter for our roster, but yet again, in another season, Luka was struggling. But I realized the problem. He wasn't getting enough minutes, so I cut our other point guard, Lonzo Ball, completely out of the rotation, and boom, Luka was back in the MVP race. He was number 1, and he was getting those big minutes, and we were able to have yet another good season as Luka won the MVP in 2026. But this means it's going to get even harder. His overall is dropping down to an 84 for this one, and in the NBA playoffs, we lost to the Denver Nuggets in the first round. Luka's numbers still look good, but his efficiency's dropping, and he's barely naturally in the rotation at this point, but I add Tyrese Halliburton to try and give us some help, as we're gonna need it. Luka needs to get these numbers up so we can try and get him another MVP. Early on in the season, we're doing pretty good, and Luka's number 1 in the MVP race at an 83 overall. But then Josh Giddey creeps in at the end of the year and ends up winning the MVP. So I've got to make some more adjustments because this isn't working. We lose in the first round, and I make a trade for Chet Holmgren to try and give us some more offensive firepower. But this might take away touches from Luka, so I wasn't really sure how this was going to go. Luka was completely out of the MVP conversation by this point, and Josh Giddey kept taking these MVPs I wanted Luka to get. He was only on All-NBA third team. I knew he could still win these MVPs. You all see how good he is in 2K, and despite his overall, I was gonna find a way to make him better. We were still able to get revenge on Giddey, beating them in the NBA playoffs, and we were even able to advance to the NBA Finals to face the Atlanta Hawks, but none of that really mattered. Even the ring we ended up getting wasn't important. I wanted Luka to get more MVPs. So I went ahead and hired a new coach, an offensive-minded coach that should be able to help us get Luka putting up better numbers. Then I went ahead and traded for Giannis, and you might be confused at this point, but I told everybody on the team, stop shooting, and I gave Luka the tendencies to just do everything. That way, even at his low overall, he should be able to still backpack the team, and it should have him shooting a bunch, and this worked phenomenally. His numbers were ridiculous. He put up a 67-point game early in the season, and he was the leader in the MVP race averaging over 50 a game. Absolutely ridiculous, and we were still able to get wins with Luka putting up all these shots, and of course he got the MVP with those ridiculous numbers. He even put an 81-point game up, matching Kobe Bryant's record. Also, you see by the numbers, nobody else was really scoring. It was just Luka backpacking. But now his overall is down to a 78, making this even more challenging. We were able to get out of the first round, and we got revenge on Josh Giddey once again. Even at a 78 overall, Luka was still putting up big numbers, although it was on bad efficiency. We somehow still make it to the NBA Finals, led by a 78 overall Luka Doncic, but our run was over there as we lost to the Charlotte Hornets. Now, I made a move for Jason Tatum. He's a great defender. He's not really going to be shooting on this team. I just needed another high overall player to help out Luka as we try to get him another MVP. We were off to a strong start to the season, and Luka was still putting up these big numbers. So, by the end of the year, he was yet again the MVP. We were barely over 500, but those numbers are still ridiculous. We lost in the NBA playoffs, but we were still able to complete the goal of winning the championship, as Luka is now dropping to a 73 overall. I went ahead and got the reigning champion Victor Wembanyama and added him to our roster so that we could get even more help for this team, and I updated Luka's tendencies just to make sure he's still taking all the shots, and this was still working. Luka's numbers were ridiculous, albeit on bad efficiency. It didn't matter. He averaged over 45 points per game on the season. He is only a 72 overall at this point, and that's going down even more to a 67. If we can somehow get another MVP, that would be ridiculous. But now in the first round, we end up losing to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Luka drops to a 65, making this challenge even more difficult as I pick up Cade Cunningham for our roster. Luka Doncic, his stats are not looking good, and the efficiency is going to be awful even if he puts up these big numbers. He's not even naturally in the rotation at this point, but of course, I forced give him all those minutes, and we're absolutely awful. He's not even in the MVP conversation, as we're barely winning games. We only win 34 games on the year, and Scoot Henderson gets the MVP. Luka's numbers look good, the efficiency looks awful, as we head into the offseason and try to make a move to somehow get this roster better. Also, the Heat blew a 3-0 lead in that series, by the way. I went ahead and added Jabari Smith Jr. to the team, further stacking up the roster, and it seemed like he was a difference maker for us. Luka's numbers look good, and we were actually winning this time, so he was back in the lead for the MVP race at a 65 overall. By the end of the year, we were a 500 team, and Luka was the MVP, averaging almost 40 points per game. Ridiculous, I know, but now his overall is a 61. We end up somehow getting out of the play-in tournament led by a 61 overall Luka, and even make it out of the first round, but that's where our run ends. We lost to the Clippers. Luka's numbers still look solid, especially for a 61. In player progression, he drops down even more. I go ahead and try to make a trade, but I can't even make it happen. My trade override is broken by this point. We're in the year 2033. Luka's still putting up these big numbers, but it doesn't matter. We lose almost 60 games, and I knew by this point the run was over. His numbers still look great, but nothing else was going to happen. He ended up putting up over 41,000 points in this simulation, and he ended up winning 7 MVPs. That's it for the video. Have a great day. Be sure to like and subscribe.